that first money in is so risky. But if you come out of it and you don't learn anything and you're like, well, like something's working, we don't know why, but this is what we want to scale. That's bad territory.
Welcome to the Cybrary Podcast.
Well, welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Welcome
back.
Well, welcome back.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Ryan Corey, CEO and co-founder of Cybrary, and I'm excited for you to join us on today's episode. Let's jump in.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Cybrary Podcast. I'm Mike Ruin, VP of Engineering and CISO at Cybrary. Today, Jonathan and I are talking to Les Craig. Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Jonathan Myers. I'm the principal infrastructure engineer here at Cybrary. So I'm responsible for all the cloud, DevOps, and CI/CD stuff and defending those things. So, Les. Great. So once again, my name is Les Craig. I'm a partner at Next Frontier Capital, which is an early stage regional venture capital firm located in Bozeman, Montana, where we are today at the global NFC headquarters.
Nice.
So yeah, great to be here and amongst old friends.
Yeah, a little disclaimer, Les and I work together at RedOwl, and Jonathan and I work together at RedOwl. Les and Jonathan actually never worked together at RedOwl, but here we all are, staying connected. So Les, I don't know if you want to give a little background on like what you guys do and yeah.
Well, maybe I'll tell you. Maybe I'll start a little bit with kind of my journey to
that'd be great
at the firm in the first place. So as Mike said, I was one of the co-founders of RedOwl. I started out. I was VP of product. I think my going away mug appropriately titled it VP of everything. I had a bunch of different roles at the company as we evolved from 3 to, I think it was around 30 when I left. But super fun journey, just learning the whole startup experience, kind of drinking from the fire hose. Was on the Sand Hill Road tour with Guy and Rennie when we went out to raise our Series A. And so I had it, I kind of got some experience on that side of the table when we were raising. From RedOwl, I started. I took a break shortly after we raised our A. I really needed a break. So I started a data science services company called The 20. That was a fun little ride, and eventually landed up at Montana State University, where I ran an incubator program called the Blackstone Launchpad. So did that for about 3 years. And then in 2017, when Next Frontier Capital was raising our second fund, I joined the team here as a partner. And so about 9 years now working in startups, with startups, helping startups. And now, for the past 3 years as a partner at NFC, leading investments in early stage companies. So that's how I got here. A little bit about what we do. So we're now on our third fund. Our first fund was primarily focused on providing access to capital for Montana founders. There was quite a backlog here, great founders working on really, really great ideas. But you can imagine, probably the typical reaction of a California VC when you call and say, hey, I'm in Montana building a high growth startup. And frankly, before 2015, there was, it was a rounding error. It was basically zero venture dollars, annually, maybe a couple million, laughable number, but sad. There just was not access. There wasn't a boots on the ground presence. And so since our firm's inception, we have now not only we've invested in 20 companies with a Montana operating presence. We have 33 portfolio companies across all three funds. And we're really proud. The number we're most proud of is, we've attracted a little over $6.50 for every dollar we've invested in our Montana portfolio alone. And to date, that number there's about 200 million that's been paid in to Montana-based tech companies. But we also, with Fund 3, we've diversified our strategy a little bit, and we're starting to invest a lot more in the region that we're calling the Intermountain West. So Colorado, Montana, Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming.
Nothing happening in Colorado. There's no tech in Colorado.
It's really Colorado's been fun. I started to get involved in Colorado when I was with the Blackstone Launchpad in around 2015. And I would go down there and I would spend a lot of time in Techstars community, a lot of time with the Boomtown Accelerator. So a lot of the early stage programming down there. And it's been fun just getting to know folks in that community. And it is hot, especially Denver, by the way.
Yeah.
Denver is where most of the early, it's kind of like the similar phenomenon what happened a few years ago with the Bay Area, or with kind of Palo Alto area, and then the big migration up to San Francisco. Like that's kind of similar phenomena in, Boulder, and now this big migration to Denver, where a lot of the early stage, a lot of the hotter companies are.
Do you find that the hotter areas tend to be also where there's a high density of like colleges and universities? Because I feel like that's the case. Like if you look, it's Boston, it's Denver, Boulder, it's, various places.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things that helps with. I mean, number one, there's this natural, cycling of young, energetic people. Obviously the 4-year cycle that,
as opposed to me, that's old and not energetic.
The stalwarts of of tech, but
the grumpy old men.
Influx, and I'd say it's rare. A lot of times people think like, oh, well, colleges and universities, that's a great hub for startups because students are starting companies, and students are, and those aren't necessarily the highest, probability or highest prospect for attracting early stage investment. It happens on occasion. We invested in a pretty early stage company that was essentially a spin out of Montana State University. But what's much more exciting about that type of environment is I think it provides, it contributes to the culture. And so generally those sorts of dynamic kind of college communities where there's, lots of great academics, lots of great students, lots of great tech talent. I mean, it generally leads to the culture that I think attracts great founders. So.
Which is interesting because San Francisco doesn't really have like a huge college presence per se.
Yeah.
Right. There's like UCSF and like a handful of like super small things. But I guess because Stanford is so close.
Exactly. And I think that's what happened. I mean, I kind of remember it. I want to say it was probably around 2012, 2013, where that kind of migration started happening, where so many companies started moving their headquarters to San Francisco, because that's where people wanted to live. Yeah. I mean, that's where the quality of life was. That's where the vibrant scene was. That's where people could actually afford housing. Well, at the time, I guess it's
food
scene. Yep. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. But, it's interesting too, similarly, like with Montana State University, another thing you get with university, like culture is you get academic centers of excellence. And so one of the coolest, little known facts about where we are in Bozeman, Montana, it's like, I told people I was moving here, they're like, oh, are you going to ride a horse to work? Or like, what are you going to do? Ranch bison? Like, no, actually there's some good stuff here. But interestingly, Montana State University has one of the strongest photonics and optics programs in the country. I mean, there's Arizona State, there's others that are, maybe one rung above them, but it's a strong cluster. And not only is it an academic center of excellence for that sort of industry, but there are, I think per capita, we have more photonics companies in Gallatin Valley, which is, the county where MSU is, than anywhere else in the US. And granted, I mean, it's like the joke in Montana is like, per capita anything, we're number one in the country. There's like 1 million people in the whole state, but that being said, I mean, it's a really exciting scene. Right now we are invested. I'm on the board of a photonics company here in Bozeman. That's just unbelievable technology, almost sci-fi kind of tech. It's really, really special company. And then the most significant investment, I would say, in the photonics space to date is a company called Blackmore Sensors and Analytics, frequency modulated LiDAR, or FMCW LiDAR system that was tackling kind of the sensor system to be integrated with the perception stack for autonomous driving vehicles. The company was actually acquired by Aurora, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, a Bay Area company, one of the hottest in the space. And Aurora just acquired Uber ATG last week. So anyway, so now there are, over 100 Aurora employees in Bozeman. What started out as a LiDAR spin out, essentially of university technology, in 2016, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that's pretty common. Like Cybrary is based out of College Park because University of Maryland. So we enjoy those benefits. And then you notice a lot of like cyber stuff, like RedOwl was in Baltimore, and then a lot of that like data science stuff, you got Johns Hopkins right there. You're getting all the people that are getting out of the science field and want to go crunch other data. And then if you look at Stanford Medicine, like that's just spins out medical startups like nobody's business. But Stanford has that special program where they just kind of give you their IP and then they take a cut.
Oh yeah.
And
So interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things I've been working with Montana State University mostly. I mean, I have some great relationships at University of Montana, which is just down the road in Missoula, but Montana State University and Daniel Giuliano, the director of tech transfer there, they have taken leaps and bounds in terms of reinventing that model to encourage the commercialization of IP. And there's some really amazing programs that have gotten off the ground recently, but he's, primarily modeling it off of Stanford, like the playbook's written, So it's pretty exciting. And the idea too, then, is hopefully you also attract faculty members that want to commercialize technology, right? That creates the whole, snowball. So,
yeah. I'm curious, like how your technical background, how much does that play? Like when I've talked to VCs, it's always there's a wide array of capability and knowledge. I'm curious, like how you sort of find yourself in that role, and being much more technical than I think a lot of others tend to be.
Perhaps, yeah. It's a good question. I was applied math, computer science major in my undergrad, but I think, the joke always at RedOwl was, the programming language that I learned at the academy was Ada 95. So, yeah. So, like, how relevant is that?
Not relevant.
I know. So it's like, I'm not the kind of guy that's gonna get down with the CTO of a company and peel back the frame. I would say I know enough to have a conversation, but one of the things that, we really pride ourselves, I think, as a regional fund. So specifically, we don't have any vertical specificity in the investments that we make. We do have more comfort level. Like, I love seeing cybersecurity deals because that's where a lot of my network is. And I mean, I've even reached out, I think we've talked about a couple of companies. And so I think that's the more important thing, at least for our firm as a regional investor, without vertical specificity. Like, none of us are experts in any of these, business verticals that we invest in, but, we're more generalists when it comes to, the technology, but certainly having some aptitude and comfort, helps. And in some cases, it's interesting, like as a regional firm, like I've looked at biotech deals. You talk about how like out of the wickets that is,
right?
But those require like just a deeper level of effort and reading and doing homework. But ultimately, it gets back to the relationships that really help us, I think, source great potential investments, but then also due diligence on those investments.
Cool. So Jonathan and I have talked to any number of companies that, at various stages of, having been successful or going through the process, have gone through various processes, but we've never really talked to someone who sits on that other side of that table. I'm curious, like, what is it that you're looking for? Like, what if I'm trying to close you, right? What do I do?
So G, I got to tell you, like, this is one thing that as a former founder totally perplexes me as to why this is such a mystery, because it's actually not that complex. Like, VC is a very simple game. It's just, there's so much like of a mystery or mystique about it. And I'm glad you guys are doing this today, because hopefully this is like one of many of like people just like,
why there's mystique, right?
No,
there's this like legend around Sand Hill Road, right?
I guess.
These like castles that are built on this one strip of road. It's like...
Well, I hope, I think one of my biggest hopes for the industry is that, there continues to be, I think, more diversity in the industry, more diversity of background and just in general. I mean, even the fact, like, here I am, a veteran, that was an Army Ranger, and, and we didn't even talk about that. That was before I like had a professional career, but like, that's kind of rare in the industry. And I'm starting to see more of it, and it's great. But I think it's also what a lot of people don't realize is this is such a new industry.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's a few decades old, really. Right. And so I think that's part of it too, is I think the more it evolves and the more like the secret's out. But like when we were out in Sand Hill Road raising RedOwl, I had no clue. I mean, I read the books and everything. I read venture deals, and
Silicon Valley wasn't out yet.
That's right. The series wasn't out yet.
You couldn't do your research.
And even some of the like Secrets of Sand Hill Road certainly that wasn't out yet. But like I really didn't even understand what was going on, and we were in the process of doing it. And I can remember, I think it was so foreign to all of us that I can remember literally, we were taking paper copies around, and I can literally remember being in the back of the car and shuffling slides, being like, well, that didn't work. Well, let's take this one out and put that in. And it was like every pitch was different. And some of those pitches were just like hilarious, like just the kinds of questions that we were asked. And so, but I think ultimately it got down to, we didn't understand what we were doing. And when you have an understanding of what you're walking into, you can be so much more effective. Like, I don't need to say this, like, it's simple. It's doing business. So to give you a little bit of an insight out of the playbook, I think one of the biggest things we see as a regional firm is like founders that are aware of what stage they're at and what type of investment they should be raising, And so like for our firm, and that's what I'll kind of talk to today, because that's like a good frame of reference. And I think it's helpful also to where a lot of companies find this chasm of like, I can't get meetings. I can't, like, nobody's interested. And so we don't ever touch concept stage stuff, really. Unless we have done it on occasion in Montana, but it's primarily, relationship based. And, so generally, I think as a founder, you have to be comfortable going out and raising a couple $100,000 to $1 million, like first money in, seed stage. Like, you got to have a network to do that. If you don't have a network, I always tell people, like, think about going through some of the programming, Y Combinator, Techstars, like go through a tier 1 national program.
Yeah. They're everywhere now.
Yeah,
and even Labs is like everywhere.
Right. And even if you can't get into one of those, there's like these startup studios, or like the new, like, second generation of accelerators. And, I'd say, like, find a good program that has a good reputation, do your homework, get some references, and then, but you've got to stitch together a way before you go talk to VCs, typically, of, how to get that first $1 million in. And so then you're off to the races. It's like, then what do you do? Right. And, I think the answer is, like, stay lean, stay small, stay focused, but don't be afraid to test hypotheses. Like what VCs coming out of that, I think that first seed stage, that first money in, what they want to see is this a founder that's humble? They got to be gritty. They got to be humble, resource efficiency, but they've got to have learned something. Like that first money in is so risky. But if you come out of it and you don't learn anything, and you're like, well, like, something's working, we don't know why, but this is what we want to scale, that's bad territory. Like, go back to Uncle Charlie and Aunt Susanna and go get another couple $100,000. So what you have to, and then, like, the saying of, like, fail fast, pivot often, like, it's kind of a cliche and a throwaway, but there's some truth to it, in that when you go out to raise your first sort of, like, institutional money, or like when you're talking to seed stage funds, generally there's a couple things they want to see. And I would call us like a seed stage fund, but we're also kind of more of a tweener fund. Like we don't write check. We don't lead more traditional. We'll do like a regional Series A, but we won't lead, like coastal A's. We won't lead like a $10 million Series A. Right. So for, like, our stage, generally what we want to see is, do you have referenceable customers, like real customers that have been using the product? And I think back to, like, it's funny, like some of the early RedOwl customers. Like, one of my favorites was, we had this customer that loved us so much. It was one of our first 3 pilots. And they were like, oh, RedOwl, you guys are great. Oh, we love you guys. Oh, and then I'd be like, oh, the new product release is out. Let me, like, give you a demo. Oh, this is so cool. Oh, it's everything we asked for. And I'm like, well, what's going wrong? Like, what can we fix? Like, what needs improved? Oh, nothing. You guys are great. And I'm like, finally got weird. And I was like, I asked one of our DevOps engineers, I'm like, how often are they logging into the tool? Who is that again? Oh, they've never logged in. I'm like, what? They're not even using it? They said they love us. And then sure enough, like, as soon as the 90-day free trial is over and they start paying for it, now they're logging in, and now they're telling us how bad it is and how much needs fixed. But this is, like, get people using your software, get them, like, breaking it, get them, like, you want to be able to have those lessons learned, because by the time you get to a point where you have referenceable customers, by the time you have real revenue, and that's another thing too, like, we don't need to see a lot of revenue like for our stage, but we want to see tens of thousands of monthly recurring revenue, because it's showing you, number one, that there's people are willing to pay like real money for this. Number two, it shows you that you have some inclination of how you're going to price this. I mean, by the way, pricing at the early stage can kill companies. I had there was a company that I led an investment in, and we, the founder thought, oh, people will probably pay $3 to $5 a month for a seat. I was like, I think they'll probably pay somewhere around $1 to maybe $3 a month. In reality, by the time the pricing settled, took another 8 months to a year later, people are paying about 30 cents a seat.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but the only way you learn that is by making people pay for it and getting enough customers. And it depends. People are like, well, how many customers before we pitch like a seed stage VC? I like to see like, I don't know, a dozen, because I'm going to ask for 3 to 5. Like if I'm actually going to do diligence and invest, I'm going to ask for 3 to 5 references.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to source on my own another 3 of those that you don't offer as a reference. I'm going to figure out a way to get introduced.
Right.
But these are all like, so if you only have 5 customers, it's almost not enough to even get. So I say like 10 to 12, whatever. So they've got to be paying, you got to be hitting some real revenue milestones. And then I think demonstrating an understanding of the sales process and you don't need to really understand sales efficiency at this point, I think, in a company's journey or the fundraising journey, but you've got to start to be understanding at least how you're going to start to test some hypotheses related to lifetime value of the customer acquisition costs. If you're just like, oh, I'm raising, $3 million and we're going to spend $1 million on marketing and like, we're going to hire a salesperson and they're going to figure it out. Like, that's
if you're treating it like Shark Tank.
Yeah.
It's like, no, Mark, I want you to do that for me. That's why I'm giving you ownership in the company. Like,
and one of the most mature things I think, and this is really like an intro call. It's like, what's the point of talking to a seed stage VC? Like, we're never going to make an investment on the first call, right? It's a process. I mean, understand that it takes months. It's a relationship. And so, the biggest thing that I want to see on the first call is that the founder has a level of maturity of a founder who's ready to take the company from seed stage to either a coastal series A, or sometimes you can skip it. Like sometimes you do a regional A and you skip that coastal A, which is really, really great for everybody. But understanding, I think, how the money is going to be used is something that's completely in oversight for some founders. And so have a detailed plan. Like your pro forma, when you say, oh, we're going out to raise 3 million and our expectation is a 9 million pre, and it's like, what blog did you just read that told you that's the numbers you should ask for? Like, show me why 3 million is the right number. Show me how you're going to use it, and show me how it's actually a bridge to the next financeable milestone. And this is where a lot of founders really screw up, is they raise and they essentially build a pier out into the ocean. Right. And then they get to some point it's not a financeable milestone. Yeah. And because and some of this is related to just structural holes in the industry. Most funds are set up with early stage funds, or most firms are set up, they have early stage funds for doing seed deals, and then they have growth stage funds that are do like Series B and beyond. In fact, nowadays it's weird because a lot of Series A funds are even, I would call them growthy. Like they want to see the same types of metrics. They want to see the same types of last 12 trailing like growth, and like that typically like, it's like private equity-esque, but they want to see growth metrics. So anyway, long-winded way of saying like founder maturity and understanding how you're going to use the capital is like, I think how I really develop a lot of great rapport with founders.
Yeah, and I think a lot of founders and people I've talked to who've either struggled to find it or end up in bad situations down the road sort of are relying too much on the institution to tell them, oh, this is how much money we think you should have, or come up with that plan, or end up like, oh, we should raise as much as we possibly can. Like if they're willing to give us 10 million, like why wouldn't we take 10 million?
Where do you think that comes from? Yeah. Like I don't, because it's
naivete. I think it's a little bit of I think there's a little bit of they're founders, depending on how often you've done it. I think I'm curious what Les's answer is.
Yeah. So there's a really interesting phenomena that I think gets glazed over quite a bit, and it's related to the way you set up a portfolio of investments in venture is very much related to a couple things: fund size, board seats, average check size, reserve ratio for follow-on. So like there's a big equation that goes into how you calibrate deals. And this is one of the really interesting, like hidden secrets of Bozeman Venture. To write that book, right? So this is like one of the really interesting takeaways, though. Is it's like, as you are successful as a VC firm, okay. So like our first fund, 21 million, 10 investments. Second fund, 38 million, 16 investments. Third fund, we're raising 70 million. Well, as you get more and more successful, generally your ability to raise increases, raise bigger and bigger funds. Generally, you bring on, more and more partners, or at least more and more, help.
Right.
So you can take more and more board seats. But I mean, it gets to a point where you got to balance this teeter-totter. And I think what happens is firms get to a point where they raise, even regional firms, and I don't want to call out any specific examples, but there's a bunch. You can just look in our region. They raise funds that are so large that they can no longer do the types of seed stage deals because they can't write checks that small.
Right.
They would have to write hundreds of checks a year. And if they're staying generally regionally focused or even vertically focused, they can't write enough checks. So they have to go further downstream. So now they start writing bigger checks at later series, and it just becomes a function of fund structure, not what the companies need.
Right. It's funny because I think back to, I worked at a professional services company a long time ago, and we were small. We called ourselves like a boutique, right? Like we were small, 6 to 8 person professional services company, had some contracts. And then there became more and more, as we became more successful, there's this like pressure to grow because these companies that we're doing business with want to give us more business, but we can't handle the more business. So the only way, and then they're like, well, we can either take all of our business away from you, or you can grow to meet this business. And so then we found ourselves in these like places where we're like, whoa, these projects are way larger, way riskier, way more complicated than the things we had been working on earlier. And it's funny, the parallel between just businesses, right? I mean, like it's something I've never really thought about on the VC side. Like, what's that really look like?
It's identical. And it's, it's kind of like, gets back to, like one of my sayings of like, you're either growing or you're dying. Like, right. There's only 2 options. But what's interesting in VC, I think there's an opportunity to be, and this is where our firms, our philosophy and our mission is to really kind of, and other people say this like, oh, we're founder centric, but I mean, we are founder centric at our core, because that's why we started in the first place, to meet Montana founders where they were, to help capitalize them, to get them to a point where they could get follow-on, where they could get coastal investment, and to get them ultimately to an exit. And we've had 5 exits across of the portfolio to date, and so we're proving that thesis, but we're staying focused on that thesis. We're not trying to become like,
you're not trying to open an office in Sand Hill Road.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So what percentage do you think you're spending with your sort of the good like the ones that are doing really well versus the ones that are struggling? And I asked this, because I had a friend who in the 90s, after the CEO of that boutique, he went off and became a fund manager or whatever. And talking to him, he was like, I thought it'd be so exciting. I'd be working with all these smart tech guys. And then he's like, and then I found out like most of my time was spent with the guys who were struggling. And it was just, it was hard and painful. And I didn't get to spend any time with the ones that were doing well. So I'm curious, like what your experience has been. And that was like 10, 15 years ago. So I'm sure, maybe things have changed.
Well, fortunately in our portfolio, they're all doing well.
Of course.
So this is interesting though. This is one thing that has really taught me a lot about, and I feel super blessed that, some of the a few of the companies that I've led investments in that have struggled have gotten to really positive end states. And one of them in particular that was struggling, I was spending a lot of time with, ended up getting an early exit, and so that no longer on the plate. So
Right.
But one of the things that it taught me about investing, that experience in particular, is that you want to be spending your time as much as possible, with, it's like being a father. Like, I want to be spending my time as much as possible with all my children, like equally. And I want it to be happy memories, not like bailing them out of jail and things. Right. But what it really gets back to, like, similar to being a parent, is it's like, I guess it's a little different than being a parent, because you can't like choose your children, but you have to make really wise decisions early on. Like with parenting, like, I feel like from 0 to 6, like, that's a foundation. And if you screw that up, like, you're in for a ride. So like with founders, when I'm doing diligence now, like, one of my biggest criteria is like, is this somebody that I want to spend the next 7 to 10 years with? Because it's a marriage.
Yeah.
And so diligencing the founders at that level, because everything else, we see 300-400 deals a year at our firm. Everything else could be spectacular, but that absolutely has to be as well.
Right. How much do you think that?
How much do you think
that plays into it? Yeah.
To answer the question, I guess I skirted the answer a little bit, but if it's somebody that I absolutely want to get behind and spend time with, even if they're struggling, that's okay. Like, those are still happy memories. And then the reality is, I think, all founders in different ways struggle throughout the journey. That's just part of the business. But if you make good investments, you spend less time struggling with people that you don't want to be struggling with. And
I think a good analogy is probably just like how I hire people, right? Like, and I'm making an investment in terms of the person, their time, my time, and right. Do I want to work with this person is one of the most, like, do I want to sit in the same room with this person is one of the most critical parts of the hiring process. Like, you could be phenomenally smart, but if for whatever reason, like, our personalities don't go well, like, if you're struggling, I'm not going to want to be in the room. I'm not going to spend the time with, whatever it is. And I wonder, and you guys are looking at probably relationship building that's going, 7 years. That's more, in tech. Like, I assume most people are, somewhere between 2 and 5 years. I'm always happy when they go a lot longer. And I've had that a lot of times, or I get to work with people like Jonathan again and again and again. But
And to raise you on that too, it's even more relevant in VC. There's founders that I'm meeting regularly with that I know there's no chance that we would lead an investment in those companies, maybe even in the next 2 to 3 years. They're just so early.
Right.
But that's me choosing to spend time and invest in those relationships. Those relationships could go way beyond 10 years, because they could be a fund 4 or fund 5 investment. And even the founders, it's interesting, even the founders that we've invested in that have exited, that, are now having the golden handcuffs on for a couple of years, like, they may come back around again. Like, you treat them well, and you focus on, our reputation of being, truly founder centric. And those relationships, frankly, could end up being lifetime career.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier, like, you still need that network. Like, if you're going to lead another investment in another startup, like, that's the perfect guy, if he's in the same space,
exactly,
to go and be like, hey, I need you to take a look, just tell me what it is. And you have that rapport already. So, that relationship's probably even more valuable.
Exactly.
Right. Or potential customer. You and I have talked in those grounds, right? Where Les has reached out. He's like, hey, would you, like, you guys, this is a company that maybe you guys would want to look at. And it's like, yeah, we look at them and from a customer perspective, not from a peer perspective or competition perspective.
Yeah. I tell another thing too, that founders don't do enough of is diligencing their VCs.
Yes.
And this is something that's so important. I try to encourage this because, once again, we have a very transparent culture when it comes to, like, our founder relationships. So I basically tell founders, pick any of our portfolio when we get serious, of course.
Right.
We get out and get to a term sheet. I say pick any of our portfolio company CEOs. I want to make an intro. Here's the ones I've been most involved with. But I want them to talk to our founders and hear it from their their mouths as well.
Do you think that's something also that's like sort of just totally an oversight from the founder's perspective, is the recognition that like, no, this is a relationship. You guys, you're not just, it's not just money that you're interested in. It's this longer term. We need to understand you. You need to understand us. And
I think people don't look at it as like a partnership. They look at it as like, oh, you're the big bad bank
check writer.
And like, you're going to come after me.
Right. You're the ATM, right? Like that's,
I'm so glad you guys brought that up, because that's actually one of the biggest misconceptions of venture, is the check writer scenario. It couldn't be further from the truth. And it's actually one of the reasons why I think founders get wrapped up in the fundraising process around silly things. Like one of the biggest ones is valuation. Mm-hmm. Always is. And it cracks me up because it's one of the least significant terms early on. Founders are so intent on, and I get it, I was there, like, oh, I got to hold on to as big of a piece of this pie as long as I can. And the reality is, like, for a modest outcome, who cares? Like, what you want is the big outcome. And at that point, who cares what the size of the piece is? I mean,
you want an outcome.
You want an outcome, period.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, you want a good outcome, right? You can, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. 10% of zero is still zero.
Right. So it's there's reasonable limits. Like, I think what another thing founders don't realize is, like, when I model an investment, when I look at, does this investment make sense for us? Do we get to our targeted ownership? What sort of milestone does this investment, reasonably get us to? And what kind of expectation can we have at that point in terms of valuation and follow on? And we model investments before we do them, all the way out to multiple potential exit scenarios. And I don't just model it for me, model it for the founders too, because we have to be confident that we can get them to a good place in the exit. So typically when we price a deal, when we look at pre-money and what we're paying in and what the post ends up being, we take everybody into consideration, because it's a team sport and a team game. And a lot of times when I see founders, they'll push back like, oh, we think the company's worth, twice as much as that pre-money. Like, prove it. Well, yeah. Or really, why do you think that? Well, because comps this or that. I'm like, okay, well, let me talk to you about why I think that's going to put you way out in front of your skis, right? And you will never catch up to it. And that's usually like, those are sometimes like smart conversations that you have to have with first-time founders. But it's one of the most, we're not just writing a check. We're not just sitting on some big equity position and like, going to board meetings with our arms crossed and being like, well, how come you're not doing this or that? Like, that's not what this business is about. It's about relationships. It's about team, working as a team.
Yeah,
it's about,
you're not shorting their stock.
No, no. So you want to try to get it right. But the worst thing, if you get it wrong, the worst way to get it wrong is being, is on the overvaluation side in my perspective, because I experienced that, and it's hard to recover from.
Right. So when it comes to like transparency, right, I think that's where a lot of founders also struggle. How transparent to be. I think it's difficult. I know just in my own career, like I won't even talk about VCs, right? Like with management and being an engineer or whatever, like I think that there's this, when you're telling somebody bad news, they tend to think that you're, even in that delivery, that you're not really giving them the full story, that you're still sort of sugarcoating the bad news. And so I think it can be difficult when you're like, I'm a fairly candid and very transparent person. And I feel like if I give too much information, it's sort of like they're like, oh, like this must still be the tip of the iceberg. There's so much below the surface. I'm curious, like what your experience is.
Yeah. So, my, what I try to do with founders from the get-go is really create a culture where, like, I want them to call me at 2 a.m., and I want to be excited to get that call, whether it's good news or bad news, because we have that relationship of trust. And so generally, like, I think there's only like 3 types of like landmines that founders can step on, frankly. One is like illegal, doing something illegal. Okay, duh.
Right.
The other is it kind of a weirder, finer line and similar, but it's like doing something immoral or unethical or misleading or, where it's not illegal, but maybe it's like untruthful or like keeping information. And to me, that's like,
unseemly. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And to me, that's the easiest one to just be that's where sometimes you see people trip up. And there's ways to do it and feel like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, we're calculating we used to calculate our ARR in terms of our last 12 months. And now we're going to project it. It's going to be end of month and we're going to multiply it by 12. And that's going to be so that we hit that quarterly growth number. Like, it's a stupid example, but it's like, right. I'm just saying, like, is that unethical? Well, it's misleading. Like, especially if I'm on the board, like, what changed? Why did we change it? So like those kinds of things can be like the biggest pitfall. And then the third thing is like just being a jerk or being an asshole.
Right.
And, I think between those three categories, like as a founder, like there's no bad news. There's no, souring a relationship. Like, we're all on the same team unless it's one of those three things. And then we got problems. Then we got real problems. So
interesting. I know through my experiences, I sort of feel like there's three categories of money. There's smart money, dumb money, and then indifferent money was the one that I learned about, which was, and I think where they just sort of trust everything is going well. It's not dumb. They're not aware, or they don't have, it's not that they don't have opinions or don't think that it could be going better. They just are somewhat indifferent. And, I think people, my feeling is definitely look for the smart money. You want smarter people than you. You want people telling you what you don't want to hear. You need that as a founder. And I think that's what you should be looking for.
Why wouldn't you reach out to your VC? Because he's probably advised other companies that might have tripped over the same rope.
It's a great point, Jonathan. Right. I mean, I think it's one of the things that is really special about VC, and I think we'll continue to make the model, highly relevant, as it continues to evolve. But we see my 33 portfolio companies. We've seen a lot over the past 5 years, and we've learned a lot too. I mean, even the 5 exits. Prior to coming to the firm, I hadn't really ever been through the legal process of seeing how an exit works, how an M&A works. And let me tell you, it makes the deal docs of like early stage venture look like it's PhD level stuff. I mean, it's crazy. Right. But learning how to work with your legal team, learning how to work with the founders to understand that stuff, to negotiate it. I mean, and by the way, it can be the difference. There's an example in our portfolio of where it was the difference in a significant amount of money for the founder just by one simple thing that we suggested they do and that they pushed back on. And it had a significant outcome for that founder. And barring us doing that, they probably would have screwed that up.
Well, it's also tough for the founder because he's still driving the train of his company. Right. And then he has to learn this entire process that's super complex if he hasn't done it before. And it's like, he's going to want to spend time with the thing he knows probably. And just kind of brush this aside. But it's like, if you have that relationship.
Exactly. And it's like a hyper leveraged process, especially towards the acquirer, especially if you're getting near the end of your runway, especially if you're like about to run out of money. And we've seen this before too, where it's like, we'll close this acquisition by the end of the year. Oh, well, holidays, And suddenly we're like, looking at the runway, we're like, well, the runway's going to run out in like January, February, and so that's another place where you can get your insiders to bridge you so that you because imagine that firm coming back and being like, oh guys, well, it's the new year. You guys are going to be done soon. Right. I mean, I'm painting this like a Disney movie villain or something, but there's, you can see how there's,
I mean, I've experienced that. I've experienced the company coming in that's doing the acquiring seemingly to stretch things out to basically break the company that they're acquiring a little bit, to push them to that point where, they're not sure that they're going to make payroll or whatever. I've definitely seen it. Also, I remember back, I think, planning for like just the unexpected. I mean, hopefully we never see like the .com bubble like we saw in the 90s, but I was involved in a company that we were being merged and acquired. It was like this sort of roll-up thing, was us and another company. And everything was hyper focused on that deal. And then suddenly like we woke up and the company that was doing all of the like merging was like, hey, I don't know if you guys saw the news, but like the bubbles burst. We're not doing this anymore. And suddenly it was like, not only were we so invested in that and it went away, but we had no deals. Our executive team was so focused on that. We didn't have any big contracts coming. We didn't, and the company ultimately went out of business. And I think those are the things where a VC can really help. I think we made a lot of mistakes. I mean, we were a small company, early, whatever, and we made some mistakes about how to structure that deal to make sure that like, hey, if the merger doesn't go through, let's make sure that we get some money for our time, but we didn't.
Another related misconception I think that founders have of VC is there's like some element of control, like in the boardroom or something after we invest, like, oh, they're gonna make me do stuff I don't want to do. Like operationally, they're gonna get involved, and that's, first of all, that's generally not the case. But most importantly, I think founders need to understand, like when we do seed stage investments, we pretty much follow the standard National Venture Capital Association, the standard boilerplate docs. And sometimes founders don't even know what that is. If that's the first time you've ever heard of it, look it up. But we'll put that in the term sheet. We're going to use the standard NVCA docs. And I mean, I've had a founder that's been like, why did you add all this stuff? These like minority provisions, protected provisions. I'm like, that's in the standard NVCA format. And it's like, well, I don't agree to that. But understanding why venture investment is always minority. We take minority positions in companies. And that's super unique to think about, right? Because we put millions of dollars at risk in a minority position and we don't have any control. So the protective provisions are ways that we mitigate risk related to those controls. But more importantly, and this is something that I have learned by seeing what happens when companies get to acquisitions, when companies get to follow-on financings, there's a couple nuclear buttons in there. And, and a good example is like blocking the sale of a company or blocking a transaction. And, some founders may be like, well, I'm not giving you that. Like if somebody offers me $250 million for my company and you say, no, we're going for $1 billion, like I want to be able to sell it. And then like the reality is, I get it. You're concerned about that, but it's a nuclear button. Right. Because imagine when somebody on the other side of the table is offering you money and they can leverage you to do things that are going to hurt the investors.
Right.
If we don't have the nuclear button, we can't
leverage
negotiate.
Yeah. Right.
And it actually protects the founder.
Right.
Protects the founder to give them leverage to negotiate. So that's the complex stuff about VC is kind of the docs and the legal, but it's still, once you get to understand it, it's simple.
Right. And if you understand the why, like, and again, it gets back to that relationship, right? Like why would I be taking money from you? Why would I be getting into this relationship if I think that you're going to use that button in some way that's going to screw me? Like why? Like, no, we're all in this for the same purpose. And probably what's good for me is good for you. And unless one of those other three circumstances we talked about earlier, and fraud or whatever. Yep. But yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's probably one that a lot of people don't really think about in terms of why would I give this level of control to you?
We didn't talk a whole lot about cyber, specifically like early stage cybersecurity companies. But one thing I will say about that industry is it's a fascinating trend. I haven't been seeing that many seed stage cyber companies lately, as much as I have in the past. I mean, the last investment that we made in a seed stage cybersecurity company was probably 2019.
Is it because like it's just a bad sector to be in because the exit strategies are so distorted based on the major players that are just going to gobble you up and leverage you?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've been seeing lately is I've seen a couple good companies, but they just haven't been able to demonstrate the traction that I want to see. They haven't been able to really demonstrate, I think different.
I want to actually pull on that thread because I wonder if you can demonstrate some of that you're looking for, that there's a market, that there's people willing to spend money. If they actually are just sort of skipping that seed stage. They're like, hey, so the only people that you're seeing are the ones that are actually struggling, and the ones that aren't, the ones that have that are actually just out there making money, right? And sort of skipping that seed stage because they're able to either somehow they're leveraging other technologies, and so it's not as expensive to get started anymore. So maybe they're able to do a little bit more on their own.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know, right? Because where we're getting at is, I would say I'd say the recent trends are probably more around like analytics, AI, machine learning, things like that.
Well, you forgot quantum.
Quantum. Sorry. Yeah, quantum, military grade. Those things are not cheap, right?
Yeah.
To scale that to an enterprise level, right? Because when you're going to go public or get acquired, like you need to have some enterprise customers in the cyberspace.
Yep.
Right.
And scaling those type of backends, right? Like we had similar issues at RedOwl trying to scale like the analytics engine and like the amount of data you're ingesting. It's not an easy feat.
Yeah.
And so you're going to need money because you just need the engineering resource to make that. And that's where I think.
I mean, I think it depends on who's starting the company and who's doing that work, because yes, I think that you have so many of these things, like things that didn't exist in the past, like being able to use things in the cloud and all these other services, and where it's pay as you go. And so you can build like when we started at RedOwl, in order to run a model cost us like thousands of dollars, to run it overnight. Like
the Office Space moment that we had that one time.
So when somebody forgot the comma in the CSV or whatever, and like spent $4,000 on nothing. Yeah. But oh look, the model didn't converge. That was $5,000 well spent. So yeah. But I do think that there's a little bit more that you can bootstrap yourself, and maybe, I don't know. I'm sure that's the case for some people. I'm sure it's not the case across the board. But I wonder if that's a little bit of a trend in technology.
What I would love to see, I mean, I think so often in cyber, there's a trend where it's like, oh, we got to go after the enterprise, like enterprise. This is an enterprise solution. And then it's like, oh, well, then you need the team of cigar chomper, like salesmen that are going to go in
Well, because end users aren't going to buy it.
Right.
End users will not buy cybersecurity products. I mean, they'll buy LifeLock if you consider that a cybersecurity thing. And then LifeLock's going to end up paying you money because they lied to you.
Yep.
But like, I don't know. Personally, I don't think I have bought an end user cybersecurity thing, maybe except for like Eero Plus, that just gives me pie hole, basically, that I don't have to worry about. Yeah. Right. Like other than that, like there's endpoint malware protection, but I would say on Windows Defender's pretty much got you covered. Yeah. And like, I don't know what you'd be paying for.
So here's
but there's something, wait, hold on a second. But there's something between enterprise and consumer.
This is it. Yeah. So this is where I think there's an opportunity. Prosumer. But I would love to see, and I don't know why I'm not, but like, maybe this is like a call to arms. Why is there not more like of a mid-market solution? Because if it wasn't apparent 5 years ago or 10 years ago, like it should have been, but now more than ever, like those companies need to be posturing and taking, a significant, they need solutions. They need the enterprise tools. Why not build tools for them in the mid-market? And specifically, I think there's a really unique opportunity. And I invested in a company that they weren't a cybersecurity company, but they almost had a cyber-like solution. The founder just didn't realize it. And they did, it was called Alpin. They did SaaS subscription monitoring. Mm-hmm. So how many SaaS subscriptions are you paying for that you don't need, you don't use? And really interesting window into the world of third-party authentication. And who am I authenticating with? Oh, I had my Chrome browser open. My kids were on it. They authenticated with a Russian gaming site using my work email address. This didn't actually happen. I'm just saying like this right. But to me, like this is an amazing cybersecurity solution. So, and not only that, but it's one that the mid-market could look at and say, oh, wow, this isn't just a cost center, which like most cyber tools are like, right? I mean, you're guarding against existential risk. This actually can make me money or save me money.
So I have 2 points on that.
Right.
One, if the company's sort of around, right? Like they need cybersecurity insurance, right? The person that's providing that is going to dictate name brands that they want to see. Investors are going to want to see name brands that they're using to protect it? And what makes you think there is a dedicated security person at that mid-market customer that's going to know what they want and what they're looking for?
This is a problem. This is a big problem.
Or they're just going to buy the one that they're seeing on the ad at the airport.
Yep.
Right. I think that's an interesting problem because Mike and I get pitched a lot by some software vendors and stuff like that, and it's terrible. But like they got to be making money, right? Because they're around 2 years later, getting us back up, and we're like, no.
Yep.
And so I think cybersecurity. We all know there's shortage of people. Like enterprises can't keep their stuff staffed, and they have money to pay. So I think we don't have that middle tier. Because,
and I think that's where managed service providers and others come into play, right? So it's like, why am I building why try and sell to all these companies that don't have a security person, have right? Like sell to these other companies that are going to provide that as a service to them. There's scale there. I don't have to make as many sales. I think that and we're already seeing that. We talk to any number of companies on this podcast and through people that we pitch or whomever, where that's really where they are, right? They sort of see this like, there's this huge need, this huge market, but it's really hard for us to tap that market directly. And so we have to go this sort of more indirect route through managed service providers. So always a pleasure talking to you. Jonathan, any final thoughts?
I just want to thank Les for hosting us in the podcast here in his office studio that we set up. And so it's great getting to visit Bozeman. First time to Montana, so it's fun. And hopefully we'll do some skiing this weekend.